Hey friends, let's spend the next 8 or so minutes talking about life, death, and everything in between. Or after. Have you ever read the news or gone through a really terrible period of life and wondered to yourself, is this all that there is? This world that we're living in is not the world at all that we were meant for. Sin brought along horrible suffering, pain, and sorrow. Every time I open my phone, something else has happened. Is this all that life has to offer? Is the purpose of life focused on just dodging and surviving the chaos? Believe it or not, the answer's in the Bible. Today we're talking about the next I am statement made by Jesus. I am the gate. It's John 10, 7-10. In this portion, Jesus is doing two things: to condemn the false teachers and bad leaders, and second, to give hope to God's people in salvation. Context. Jesus is in conversation with the Pharisees, whom he is condemning. The Pharisees were self-serving leaders in Israel. Before this, in chapter 9, Jesus has healed a blind man, giving him vision for the first time, and the Pharisees were mistreating that man and refuting Jesus' divinity. In chapter 10, Jesus tells 3 parables, and we're talking about the second one. Jesus is reiterating what he said in the first parable before about being the true shepherd of his sheep. The sheep that are his know him and follow him when he calls. Okay, but the listeners don't seem to get it, and so he repeats himself in another way. God, being gracious, explains it again. This time, he calls himself the gate. Let me explain. In the summertime, the sheep would often be kept in a pen outside made from piled up rocks. There's no roof on it and no door, just a gap. The rock walls have thorns on top to keep wild animals out, and the shepherd sleeps in the doorway, acting as the gate. He's still presenting himself as the shepherd here, since it was the shepherd's job to sleep in the opening, controlling what goes in or out. Now, the main players. First and foremost, Jesus. Jesus' use of the shepherd as a metaphor for himself is important because it was used for 1,000 years leading up as a metaphor for king. And Jesus is also claiming to be the Messiah, the one who brings salvation. He identifies 2 other parties in this situation. One, the one who enters the gate. This is God's people. And the second party are the thieves and robbers who come to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus is denouncing all those who come before him, except those who acknowledge Jesus, since they'd also be entering through Jesus. For example, John.
Nice!
The people who are denouncing Jesus are false teachers, focusing on their own gain and not leading people to God. The thief and the bandit are used as a metaphor for the leaders of Israel in the Old Testament and other ancient Jewish texts. In this specific case, he's calling out the Pharisees, who aren't so fair, you see. The conflict. After sin entered the world, humanity turned against itself and turned against God. Israel was meant to be the moving player that brought the world back to God, but they didn't. They repeatedly failed and went back on their end of the plan and chose self-glorification and sin. I'm going to take a moment here to express that sin, in short, is when we miss the mark. We practice things and engage in things and behave in ways that are outside of the context of God's intention for them. For example, it's not sinful to work and earn money. It's sinful to hoard money and make gains by harming others. It wasn't sinful for the Pharisees to be leaders. It was sinful that they didn't lead people to God as they should have. The Pharisees, as respected Jewish leaders, acted in selfish gain. Jesus, the Messiah they've been waiting for, was right there with them, and they refused to acknowledge him. The proof was there. The man born blind could see. They were cruel and unjust leaders, harassing the man who had been blind before Jesus healed him, and trying to convince people not to follow Jesus. Jesus calls them out on their garbage, condemning them and their actions. He calls them thieves and robbers. Thieves and robbers were people who, for selfish gain, would kidnap the sheep, steal their wool, and eat them up. In a sheep pen, the people who refused to come in through the main gate where the shepherd slept were there for nefarious purposes. The sheep didn't know them and didn't recognize them, so they wouldn't be responsive to them. The only way for thieves and robbers to get the sheep out of the pen would be to sneak in over the sides, slit their throats, and drag them back over the thorn barriers on the walls. For their own interest, they destroyed the sheep. Jesus was calling them out for mistreating God's people. The resolution. Jesus' claim as the gate means he's offering protection, freedom, and pasture. He juxtaposes himself with the Pharisees, aka the thieves, who come to steal, kill, and destroy. Where they bring harm and suffering, Jesus brings life to the fullest. Notice it's not an Oprah moment. Jesus is not randomly pointing at sheep and telling them, you get a life, you get a life, you get a life. He is offering those things to those who enter through him and only him. He's claiming exclusive rights to bringing salvation. In John 10:10, he says, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." As Christians, we believe that all people have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The pain and suffering in the world around us, the brokenness of our world, they all exist because sin exists. It's also not a karmic concept. You do not only ever suffer because of your own wrongdoing. Many times, the suffering we experience is because of the sins others have committed too, sometimes in a ripple effect. We, as in all of humanity, have sinned and live in our sin. We cannot stop the effects of sin. We cannot make up for our sin. We are limited beings. I did a Bachelor of Arts, and I studied a lot of political theory. I spent a lot of time learning about horrible things like genocide, famine, slavery, and oppression. Where is the justice? Is this the way the world will always be? Jesus offers us another way. He's offering salvation. He promises them that they are able to roam freely, coming in and going out and finding pasture. They are not trapped. They are able to explore further since they have chosen the safety of the gate, the true way. And Jesus has dominion over all creation. What he has to offer them, the pasture they can find, is sufficient for them. We are no longer slaves to sin after choosing to find salvation through Jesus. The path of salvation has been offered to us. Above the politics, we have a sovereign leader. We no longer have to be swayed from side to side by the chaos of the world. Up until this point, the Jews had to live really demanding lives compared to us now. They were given so many laws and were often needing to provide sacrifices in order to pay for sins and to seek righteousness. Jesus is saying that he, and he alone, is the way to true everlasting salvation. There is some foreshadowing here that Brittany will cover next week. Because of the shepherd, the sheep can move with freedom. However, this is not a prosperity gospel. The sheep were in the pen because it was nighttime. Night was the time of danger for sheep, when they were extremely vulnerable to their predators. The only proper way in or out was through the gate. Remember, the shepherd was the gate, and Jesus declares that this is him. Like the sheep, we are not promised that dangers or troubles would not come looking for us. In fact, they will come specifically because there is value in the sheep. Only a thief or a robber would try to drag a sheep from the pen from any other way. Both Jesus, who is the gate, and the corrupt leaders, who are the thieves and robbers, are present and living out their lives. In Revelation 22, Jesus calls himself the bright morning star. The morning star appears at the darkest time of night, and then the coming day follows. Even though the sheep are in a risky situation at night, Jesus is there in the darkness. In Jesus, the Jews could find freedom from the heavy weight of the law. The Gentiles could find a place away from the dangers of wandering on their own. When Jesus offers us salvation, he is especially referring to the eternal perspective. He's calling us all to join him as one flock. If we choose the way of the gate, committing to Jesus' way and staying under his dominion, we also will have the blessing of an eternity with him. The false teachers offered a path of destruction. They offered the way of sin and suffering. But our salvation is so beautiful. Whoever enters through me will be saved. This is where the parable moves into a theological fact. Jesus is the shepherd who saves. Because they've entered through the gate, they're able to go in and out. They no longer have anything to fear. There is a single path to salvation, and it was right there in Jesus. What can separate us from the love of God? Nothing. Their salvation would last into eternity. Jesus' love for them would never cease. There will be a time when we are with Jesus, and there is no longer any suffering, pain, or sorrow. Justice will have been fully served, and all things will be perfect as they're meant to be. So this is our devotional for today. I hope you can join us on Thursday night for our Thursday night thing. I'll put some questions for reflection down in the text below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.